All right. Well, hello, everyone. I believe now it's appropriate to say good afternoon. Welcome to today's Great River event. I want to wish you all a happy new year. It's so crazy to think that we're already in the middle of January of 2022. My name is Leanne Dyes, and I have the privilege of serving as the president of Great River Human Resource Association in 2022. I recognize your time is precious, and on behalf of Great River, we appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us and to learn more about the importance of mental health and wellness. Of course, we had hoped that we'd be able to see you all in person, but we do know that we made the best decision for the health and safety of all of our members. So I'd like to begin by taking a few moments to address some Great River business. We're excited about the progress that we made in 2021, including earning our designation as a 100% SHRM chapter. And we look forward to another active year in 2022 due to the efforts of our passionate and engaged group of board members. We have many things to look forward to in the coming year, including offering relevant and engaging member events each month. So be on the lookout for more information about upcoming programming on topics such as today's event on mental health, generations in the workplace, networking with area executives, diversity, equity, and inclusion, workforce readiness, and so many more. We also look forward to connecting with our members via our new LinkedIn page. So as of today, our LinkedIn page has 59 followers, and I would love to see that number increase after today's event. So if you haven't already, if you have a LinkedIn profile, please visit our page and follow us so you can stay up to date on Great River news and events. Make sure you look for Great River Human Resource Association of the Quad Cities, and I'll make sure to add a link in the chat. We're also excited about supporting the future of HR through our involvement with the launch of a local student SHRM chapter, as well as encouraging professional growth and development through providing SHRM certification study groups, legislative updates, and so much more. Also, don't miss our upcoming events. As HR professionals, we have experienced the challenges and opportunities of navigating the different working styles and communication preferences of the multiple generations in the workplace. Join us virtually for our next event on Tuesday, February 15th from 11 a.m. to 12 noon, as we will be joined by Mary Erlane, author and founder of Peak Development Strategies. Mary will share tips on how businesses can create a culture where people of different generations can work together as a collaborative and cohesive team. Registration is already available on our website. We have an exciting lineup of events for the remainder of the year, including our first ever inaugural local HR conference in May. So again, be on the lookout for more information about future events. So I'd like to also extend a huge thank you to our platinum partner, Paylocity. So let's take a moment to hear a word from our sponsor.
That's gonna be in my head the rest of the day now. Ole, ole. No, I did not put that video together because I'm not that gifted or talented, but good little video, give you a little highlight of who Paylocity is, what we're all about. Just want to thank everybody for attending today. Paylocity and myself, we're super excited to support the Great River Human Resource Association. It gets said all the time, what a challenging year it's been the last 2 years. And I've seen firsthand just how difficult it's been for HR, the great resignation, compliance, CARES Act, I can go on and on. But the resiliency that HR has shown in the last couple of years is quite amazing. You guys have become the dumping grounds for a lot of things. And I think organizations nationwide are starting to realize how vital HR is to their future success. We believe at Paylocity with our platform that we're perfectly positioned to help HR with our new reality of maybe having to communicate, engage, develop employees who may be working remotely, working from home. And then you throw into the mix, how do we attract and retain and maybe someday get to the holy grail of creating culture and optimizing employees. We think we're really positioned well for that. So anybody has any questions, want to learn more about Paylocity, of course, reach out to me. We're also going to put in a quick survey into chat, and we're going to do a prize drawing for what you see up there, which includes a Rocketbook, Universal 5000 power bank, travel mug, and soy candle. So I'll put that in the chat, fill out a quick survey, and then we'll do a random drawing later today for that winner. So thank you again for everybody's time and allowing us to join and support this great organization.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeff. And like you, I think that song will be in my head for the rest of the day. So thank you for that. But thank you for your sponsorship and your support of Great River. So in our roles, we know as HR professionals that people are an organization's most important asset. And as we enter our third year of the pandemic, now more than ever, it's important to raise awareness and to reduce the stigma of talking about mental health and well-being of our employees and in our workplaces. It's such an important topic that the SHRM Foundation has partnered with Psych Hub to offer HR professionals a certification titled the Workplace Mental Health Ally Certificate. For $99, participants complete a series of 8 online multimedia courses covering common mental health conditions, substance abuse, suicide, safety planning, diversity and bias, and communication skills. After completing the series, HR professionals will possess more knowledge and skills to better develop empathy and to support the mental health and wellness of our employees and colleagues in the workplace. So you can learn more by visiting workplacementalhealth.shrm.org, and I will also put that web address in the chat box. So today I have the honor of introducing Denise Beenk, Chief Operating Officer at Vera French. Denise will talk with us about how mental health issues affect employees and their work and how challenging the last over 18 months have been due to shifting priorities. Ms. Beenk received her Master in Business Administration from Upper Iowa University in 2017 and her Master of Social Work from the University of Iowa in 2010. She has served in her current role as Chief Operating Officer at Vera French since 2017, although her career at Vera French began in 2011. Prior to her time with Vera French, Denise was the Director of Residential and Outreach Services and Pine Knoll Administrator. Denise draws from her extensive social work experience and residential care of chronically mentally ill people. With almost 3 decades in the social work field, Denise brings a comprehensive approach to mental health. Denise also earned her SHRM CP certification in 2020. With that, Denise, welcome, and I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Welcome, and I'm very excited to be here today talking about mental health. As Leah mentioned, in 2020, and it was January 2020, I got my SHRM certification in a stroke of bad timing because that enabled my employer to tap me when COVID came along 2 months later to deal with that from the HR end. And I'm likely here today because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has really highlighted just how important good mental health is to all people in order to survive and thrive in stressful circumstances. And as HR professionals, I think you are particularly impacted because of what you have had to deal with and employees that you have had to work with during these very stressful few years. And you realize that better mental health in employees translates to a happier, healthier, and more productive workforce. And that's typically what your organizations are asking you to provide. So today we're going to talk about how to get there. And myself, I'm not a big fan of reading off slides, so a lot of what I say is not necessarily going to be on a slide. If you have questions, just feel free to jump in, type on the chat, and I'm happy to address them as they come up. If I don't see it, maybe one of the facilitators here can kind of break in and just let me know something's out there, and then we can address that and move on. So I want to start by saying that probably a lot of us have a general idea about what mental illness is, but do you know what mental health looks like? So I'd like everybody to take a minute and write down a few words or a sentence about what you feel like your definition of mental health looks like. And maybe you think of a certain person or group of people that you think, wow, they're just really mentally healthy, and here's why. All right, so you should have a few words jotted down here, and I want you to see how closely your definition of mental health matches what the World Health Organization defines mental health as, and I really like their definition because it's pretty comprehensive. So they talk about that mental health is a state of well-being where an individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stressors of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And so there's several important key concepts in there. The concept of well-being means that mental health is more than just the absence of mental illness. It's really a state of feeling, thinking, and behaving well. Realization of one's own abilities is really tied to self-esteem and self-worth, believing that you have a purpose, that you have worth and value. That's all part of being mentally healthy. Coping with normal stressors, and I would like to add coping with normal stressors in a healthy way, right? Because we can go home and drink ourselves to sleep and that would be coping, but it's not a healthy way to cope. And so are we doing things like exercising and drinking enough water and eating healthy and talking with loved ones? Those are good, healthy coping skills to help us cope with normal stressors. And then productive and contributing members of society speaks to social responsibility. And this is really the opposite of being isolated. You are active, you are involved, you're participating. And we've probably all known people in our lives where they get up in the morning, you know, they eat, they drink some coffee, maybe they putter around the yard, but they really haven't done much else with their day, day after day. And that's not a very productive and contributing kind of life. And it likely indicates that there may be the presence of some type of mental disorder. So next, let's look at what mental illness is defined as. So mental illness is a health condition, and I think it's important for people to remember that just like heart conditions and diabetic conditions, mental health is a health condition, and it involves changes for at least 2 weeks in thinking, emotion, or behavior. And it's associated with distress or problems of functioning in social, work, or family activities. So it's not something that's just in somebody's mind. There is underlying biology, just like in every other health condition. And if there's no distress or problems in functioning, then there's really no need for treatment. So we also have all known the person who's just kind of odd, a little bit different, but they work every day, they have a family, they do their thing. They probably don't need any treatment for mental illness because they are a functioning member of society and it's not really interfering with anything day to day in their life. Now, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, has some startling statistics on mental illness. 1 in 5 adults in the United States has a mental illness in any given year. And that means in this presentation, there's probably 4 to 5 people in this webinar who likely may have or have had a mental illness at some point. And that's because mental illness is the great equalizer. It does not discriminate, and it can affect anyone, anytime, regardless of age, gender, socioeconomic status, or any other type of determination. And 1 in 24 people has a serious mental illness, which is about 4.1% of the population. It's important to note, especially as HR professionals, that half of chronic mental illness begins in the teenage years. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on, as when you first start seeing signs of mental illness typically. 10.2 million people have what we call co-occurring disorders, which is when 2 or more disorders are present. And mental illness and substance abuse disorders often go hand in hand. And it's kind of a chicken egg thing. Did they start to abuse substances and develop a mental illness? Or did they start having symptoms of a mental illness and then started using substances to control symptoms? Nobody really knows, but we know they often start occurring around the same time. And honestly, it doesn't really matter what happened first. What's important is knowing that the person needs help and needs to get to treatment. And then really shockingly, $193.2 billion in lost earnings in the United States are attributed to mental illness. And this is for lost work time, lost productivity, time spent in treatment. We really, as a nation, don't manage our mental health terribly well. And 60% of adults and 50% of children do not receive treatment for their mental illness. And that's because of the stigma of receiving treatment, which is very real in this country. And it can be particularly true for people of color or other cultures. A lot of different cultures have different beliefs that, God will heal you, all you need to do is pray, or it's not okay to have mental health issues, so we have a whole lot of physical complaints and go see our physical doctors. You have to be aware of how mental illness can affect some different populations and some of the signs and symptoms they may exhibit, which may be outside of the norm for our American culture. And although mental illness can occur at any time, 75% of all mental illness begins by the age of 24. So it speaks to the age group, which really needs more eyes on them, more training, more mentoring, and more coaching to ensure that general problems that may start out to be minor don't become major issues, and that stress exacerbates what may be already a predisposition to a mental health or substance abuse condition. Now, we don't totally know the cause of mental illness, but we do know there are some components. We know heredity plays a part, biology, trauma, stress, and environmental factors can also influence the development of mental illness. And so when we talk about the heredity component, we know many mental illnesses run in families, and our genes are responsible for how we look, think, and act. However, just because a parent has a mental illness does not mean that you're going to have one. It just means you are more likely to develop a condition than if you didn't have an affected family member. And they believe that's because of the genetic component. And genes interact with the environment in ways that we don't always understand. So psychological traumas, environmental stressors, these can all influence or trigger an illness in a person who has inherited susceptibility. We know there are some mental illnesses that are linked to abnormal balances of chemicals in the brain, and those are called neurotransmitters. And these help cells in the brain communicate with each other. And if those neurotransmitters are out of balance or they're not working properly, then messages don't make it through the brain correctly, which can lead to symptoms of mental illness. This can also happen when there's defects in or injuries to certain areas of the brain. And so there is a medical component that can be present as well. And other times, illness is triggered by psychological trauma, maybe severe abuse, neglect, the death of a significant person, especially early on in life, loss of a parent. All of those things can really impact how a person grows and develops. And we know there are certain stressors like death or divorce, dysfunctional family life, changing jobs or schools frequently, substance abuse. Those can all trigger disorders as well. And some mental illness is more genetically based than others. We know schizophrenia and bipolar disorder have much higher rates of inheritance. So if you have a parent or a sibling with one of these disorders, you're at much greater risk for developing that than someone who does not have those relationships. And for depression and anxiety, it's much less heredity based. This is a lot more contingent on your environment as far as if you are going to experience this in your lifetime. And as young adults, they really are going through a lot of stressors. So we've evolved to be able to make transitions from being a teenager to being more independent, leaving our parental home, going into adulthood. But what happens during that transitional period can have a profound impact on whether you grow to be healthy or if you start having some mental health issues. And when we think about COVID-19 and the pandemic and how this has really disrupted the lives of teenagers and young adults, we need to know we're faced with an entire generation of people who are much more likely to develop depression or anxiety due to the very stressful circumstances that have been experienced during the last 2 years, because they're at these very critical times of their growth and development. And this is the generation that's going to be coming into the workplace in the next few years. So we have to be ready for it. We have to develop some systems to deal with that. And we have to really use a trauma-informed care approach with people where we assume everyone coming into the workplace has had a stressful or traumatic experience, and we help support and develop them so that they can grow and be productive members of society and have good mental health. So does anyone have ideas or think they understand why mental health is diagnosed mainly in the teens and 20s, or why 75% of people develop? I mean, can you think back to when you were that age and all of the things that you were expected to do at that time? I mean, you're supposed to figure out what you want to do for the rest of your life. That's very stressful. Oftentimes, people are moving away from home, out from family and friends and all the supports they had had for 20 years prior. You're supposed to find a job and support yourself financially. Good luck, right? Lots of things are very expensive. Entry-level jobs oftentimes don't pay that well, and yet you're supposed to, pay for your car and your insurance and your food and balance all these things out where you may not have a lot of experience doing that. You have to find housing. You're looking for a life partner. You may be wanting to have children, get a pet, get married. I mean, all of these things are coming up in your life while the brain still hasn't fully developed, which means a lot of the decisions being made by this age group are still very impulsive. So all this responsibility, impulsive decision-making, lots of stress, it adds up to some not very good outcomes sometimes. And so they really do need a lot of support and mentoring and coaching from people around them. Now that we're all gloom and doom here, the good news is that mental illness is treatable, right? So it's a health condition, which means it is treatable just like every other health condition. And there is hope that things will change and get better. So the majority of people that have mental illness continue to function in their daily lives. But people have to be willing to seek treatment and engage in treatment. And just as you can't treat diabetes without medication or insulin, you can't treat mental illness without medication therapy, and/or social supports, depending on what the condition is. So we're going to talk about some of the common mental illnesses that you're likely to see in the workplace. And this is the portion of the presentation where you're going to diagnose yourself, half your family, and a third of your friends with a mental health condition, right? This is normal. We're all like, oh man, that sounds like me. But that's just it. 1 in 5 people is going to have one of these conditions in any given year. So they are common, they are treatable, and they don't have to last forever. So the most common disorder in the United States is anxiety. And 40 million adults in the United States who are aged 18 and older, or 18.1% of the population, are impacted by anxiety disorders every year. These disorders are highly treatable, but only about 37% of those who have them actually seek treatment. And everybody experiences stress and anxiety at one time or another. It's part of the human condition. However, long-term anxiety is detrimental to health. And anxiety, in case you're not aware of what it is, but I'm sure you are, it's feelings of tension, worried thoughts. Physical changes can result, like increased blood pressure, rapid breathing. And so there's a lot of different signs and symptoms that go along with anxiety. And I'm sure you have seen this in yourself and others. So feeling restless, wound up, on edge, getting easily tired or fatigued, difficulty concentrating, your mind kind of goes blank, can't remember what was going on, being very irritable, having muscle tension, difficulty controlling feelings of worry. Sleep problems are common, difficulty falling or staying asleep, restlessness or unsatisfying sleep. And people with anxiety disorders, kind of the number one symptoms are these recurring intrusive thoughts or concerns. It may get to the point where people start avoiding certain situations out of worry. There may be physical symptoms like sweating, trembling, dizziness, rapid heartbeat. And these things can escalate into panic disorders or social phobias if they are left untreated. And that means once we get to that point, they are thinking, feeling, acting differently, and they have impairment in 2 or more functional areas of life. So what's a functional area of life? It's the things that we do every day and take for granted. So getting up, getting dressed, brushing your teeth, showering, doing basic hygiene tasks, driving a car, going to work, communicating with others, cooking, shopping, cleaning. A normal person usually probably doesn't think about those things too much, but for somebody with mental illness, there are usually 2 or more areas that are impaired. And you hear about people who, I can't get out of bed in the morning. I haven't changed my clothes for 3 days. I'm just eating, Ho-Hos and Twinkies because I don't feel like making anything. That is functional impairment, and that would indicate that there may be a problem present. The other thing as HR professionals to know is that people with anxiety disorders are 3 to 5 more times likely to go to the doctor. So these are high utilizers of the healthcare system. And that really can give you a clue when you're looking at healthcare claims sometimes of here are people who they may be having issues with a mental illness and may need some counseling and treatment for that to help improve some of their physical symptoms. And people with anxiety tend to have a lot of somatic or health complaints. They may have poor attendance, coming in late, leaving early, just get more flustered when there's stressful situations coming up, and they have higher risk to perform poorly at work and miss out on those social relationships formed with peers. And occasional anxiety is a normal part of life. It is normal to feel anxious when you're faced with a problem at work, before taking a test, before having to make a really important decision. But anxiety disorders are more than just temporary worry and fear. That feeling of anxiety does not go away and often gets worse over time. And the feelings interfere with daily activities and relationships. And so symptoms have to last at least 2 weeks, and they must represent a change in previous level of functioning for a diagnosis to be made. And you need to be diagnosed by a professional. So just because Bob says you're crazy doesn't make you crazy, right? You need to go seek a professional opinion if you really feel like someone may have a mental health disorder. So now the second most common disorder is depression. And that is a common and serious mental illness that negatively affects how you feel, how you think, and how you act. And fortunately, it is also treatable. It causes feelings of sadness and loss of interest in activities that used to bring you pleasure. It can lead to a lot of emotional and physical problems and can decrease your ability to function both at work and home. It affects about 1 in 15 people in any given year, so that's about 6.7% of the population. And 1 in 6 people, which is almost 17%, which will be people that experience depression at some time in their life. Depression can occur anytime, but on average, it first appears in those late teens and early 20s, and women are more likely than men to experience depression. Some show that 1/3 of women are going to experience an episode of depression at some point in their life, and there is a degree of hereditability in there. So about 40%, if your parent or sibling has depression, your chances are about 40% that you may have it at some point in your life as well. And depressive symptoms can vary from mild to very severe. And when we talk about severe, we're talking about people that get psychotic with depression. But normally you're going to see people who seem to be feeling sad or have a depressed mood all the time, having a loss of interest or pleasure in activities, changes in appetite, which could be weight gain or weight loss that are unrelated to dieting, trouble sleeping, either too much or too little. There may be a loss of energy or a feeling of fatigue. Increase in purposeless physical activity. So that's people who they can't sit still, they have to be up and pacing, maybe they're wringing their hands all the time. They start exhibiting these purposeless physical behaviors. And sometimes speech and movement become very slowed to the point that people notice. They often feel worthless or guilty. They have difficulty thinking, concentrating, or making decisions, and there may be thoughts of death or suicide. And once again, the symptoms need to last 2 or more weeks and be a change from the previous level of functioning. The thing to remember about depression is it can also be biologically based. So if there are thyroid problems, a brain tumor, a vitamin deficiency, all of these symptoms can appear in those conditions as well. So it's really important to rule out general medical causes when you're making a diagnosis. And the most severe or concerning type of depression for clinicians is postpartum depression. If you have an employee that has postpartum depression, they need to get to a mental health professional immediately, because we know that when untreated, it can be detrimental to their life and the lives of their children as well. So those are people that we just don't mess around with. We get them treatment as soon as they come through the door. And I also want to point out, we've been 2 years in this craptastic pandemic, and there's a lot of grief going on. And grief is not the same as depression. And I think people sometimes get that confused a little bit. Many people have experienced losses because of the pandemic. And the grieving process is natural and unique to each person, and it does share some of the same features as depression. Both grief and depression may involve intense sadness and withdrawal from usual activities, but they're also different in a few important ways. So typically in grief, painful feelings come kind of in waves, often intermixed with positive memories, whereas major depression, the mood or interest and pleasure are decreased constantly, consistently for at least 2 weeks. In grief, your self-esteem is generally maintained. You still have a positive sense of self. You believe in your abilities and strengths. With major depression, typically feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness, and self-loathing are common. And in grief, thoughts of death may surface. You might think or fantasize about joining the deceased loved one. But in major depression, people are focused on ending their life due to feeling worthless and undeserving of living, or being unable to cope with the pain of depression. So they are similar but not the same. And so those are some different things to look for. And you may have noticed even some of the signs and symptoms of anxiety are the same as those of depression. And it's not uncommon for someone with an anxiety disorder to also have a depressive disorder or vice versa. Nearly 1/2 of the people diagnosed with depression also have an anxiety disorder. So they go hand in hand. And a person with either of these conditions is also more likely to engage in substance abuse than someone without them. So co-occurring disorders are pretty common in the United States, with about 8 million people having dual diagnoses. And they can be difficult to diagnose due to complexity and interaction of symptoms. In many cases, people will get treatment for one disorder while the other remains untreated because many times they don't want to disclose the presence of the other disorder. So for some people, it's more stigmatizing to be a substance abuser, so they don't bring it up. For others, they're okay with abusing substances, but they sure don't want to tell you that they're really depressed. And so a lot of times these things go undetected or untreated. And what do you look for if you suspect a coworker has a mental illness or substance abuse disorder? So behaviors that are often seen in the workplace are lack of interest in workplace activities, just not really engaging or interacting with others, little motivation to complete tasks, low energy, having a hard time focusing and making decisions, not putting very much effort into work, seeing decreased productivity, someone who used to get a lot done no longer does. They may express a desire to quit or a lot of negative thoughts, and they may get really irritable or angry with clients or coworkers. I also call these things Friday, right? So the key is 2 weeks of sustained effort over time. And, there are some people who, if Joe comes into a job and he's always mouthing off about how this place is terrible and he wants to quit and he doesn't get much done, that doesn't mean he has a mental health condition. Joe might just be a jerk, right? So you have to be careful. It's always a change from normal behavior. If somebody's normal behavior is this, then this is just likely who they are, and it's not a diagnosable mental health issue. But if you do think you have somebody with a diagnosable mental health issue, you want to document the facts, dates, times, witnesses, statements, and you have to remember that mental illness affects the brain. And so a person with mental health issues often perceives things differently than other people. And anosognosia, it's the word for the day, is lack of insight into your condition. And it is one of the main symptoms of many major mental illnesses. And it's one of the big reasons why people don't seek treatment, because they truly don't understand that they have a disorder, that it's impacting their ability to do things. It's often this, well, there's nothing wrong with me, it's everybody else around me that's got the problem kind of mentality. And, mental illness impacts the way you think, the way you feel, the way you behave. And so if you can't see that what you're doing isn't normal, it's hard for that person to want to get treatment. And so you want to have a witness present during your conversations, and you want to put a plan in place with the person that's very clear in black and white, so they understand what the expectations are for them. And although you want to be supportive of the person, you also want to set boundaries with them. And remember that ADA and FMLA provisions may apply when you're working with someone with a mental health issue. So make sure you check out those rules to see if they apply to the situation. And unfortunately, we're seeing more and more issues in the workplace due to the pandemic. So rates of anxiety and depression have tripled since March of 2020, and substance abuse has increased as well. We can't even quantify it because there's so much out there that we probably don't even know about. But there's definitely been an increase in alcohol and marijuana abuse, as well as overdose deaths have been on the rise. We know that stress and loneliness are exacerbating factors for disorders, and a lot of stressors have increased over the last 2 years. So the loneliness and isolation of quarantine, feeling disconnected from people with remote work and meetings, Increased feelings of boredom. There's not as much to go out and do or people to hang out with. So people are sleeping more, eating junk food, and engaging in substance abuse to fill the time. There's been an expansion of roles and responsibilities, both at home and work. There's not enough people in the workplace. People's workloads are getting heavier. Kids are getting sent home from school. So parents are having to be teachers and babysitters and all kinds of things. And there's gloom and doom in the media, conflicting information. Nobody really knows what's happening. I mean, are we doing the OSHA law? Are we not doing the OSHA law? Can somebody just please tell us so we know what to do, right? People are worried about employment, income, the future of the economy. Some people in healthcare professions especially have felt unsafe at work for a long time. And some people are afraid to go out into the community. And so this general feeling of lack of control, of helplessness, it's all contributed to where we're at today. And unfortunately, at the same time, resources decreased. Many times appointments are virtual if they're even available. We can't get together in big groups like we used to, and internet and phone reliability is not always there either. And we know suicide rates are on the rise. So initially they were lower when the pandemic began, which is normal when any pandemic starts, and now we're seeing them increase. And unfortunately, the Quad Cities has higher than national average suicide rates to begin with. And overall, suicide is the 9th leading cause of death in Iowa. But here's the real key. In the age group of ages 15 to 34 years old, it is the 2nd leading cause of death. And 1 suicide occurs every 20 hours. And so that 15 to 34 year range, 75% of mental illness is going to occur by the mid-20s. And this is the age group that's going to commit suicide. So it's just really important for HR professionals to really have eyes on this group and help them get connected to resources when you see them struggling. And the highest rates of suicide occur from April to June each year. So we are quickly coming up into the spring months when rates are the highest. All right, so there are treatment options, and I want to go over those briefly. We know there are medications, and there have been a lot of new and wonderful medications with far less side effects developed in the last 10 to 15 years. There is therapy. There are substance abuse programs, both on an in and outpatient basis, and same with mental health programs. There are groups, some are virtual, some are in person. Psychosocial interventions, so, helping somebody go out and do some budgeting or shopping or meeting with them just to connect. Those are all important. But the one I really starred was the therapeutic relationships, because as HR professionals, this is really where you can make a difference. And the therapeutic relationship often forms the base of someone seeking out help and engaging in treatment. And it's because people need people, and we need to bond and feel connected with others in a meaningful way. So if you have a good relationship with an employee, they are much more likely to listen and get help than someone who you don't know that you bring in and say, hey, you need to go get treatment. So the importance of mentoring, having regular meetings with supervisors and their supervisees, giving employees space to communicate openly, and opportunities to connect with peers are all important things that HR professionals can provide. And we want people to get professional help if they need it, but in order for that to happen, a positive relationship with someone the person trusts often needs to be in place. So some strategies, we've already talked about some of them, but that you can provide to promote a healthy workplace and reduce mental health issues. Most of these are fairly simple, and I'm sure you're doing at least some of them to some degree. And here's the thing, you're all stressed out too, because I'm sure you've all been tapped to do more with less, just like everybody else in the world. So you don't need to go out and reinvent the wheel or create this wonderful new program unless you really have a burning desire to do that. But it's often best to start at, what do we have in place that we can just tweak a little bit and make some improvements that would make a difference to our employees. And the number one thing that people always talk about is communicate. Everybody feels like, they're not communicated to enough or know enough about what's going on. And communicating and developing healthy workplace systems means you need to talk about mental health, and you need to normalize that and let people know it is okay to talk about and bring up in the workplace. So trying to improve health and safety, employee growth and development, employee recognition, employee involvement, work-life balance, all of these things matter to employees. And people really just want to be heard. Even if you can't give them everything that they want, they will appreciate that you took the time to hear, listen to them, and know what matters to them as people. And think about for yourself what reduces your own levels of anxiety and depression. You know, things like having clear-cut expectations. Do people know what's expected of them at their job? Do they have the right tools to do their job? Do they have a manageable workload? Do they feel connected to and supported by their coworkers? And do they feel that what they're doing is making a positive difference? The more that you can incorporate those things into the workplace, the healthier that workplace is going to become. And think about opportunities for some team-based training and training for managers in identifying mental health symptoms or burnout, having difficult conversations with employees, and setting healthy boundaries. Those are usually the big trip-ups in the workplace where things go bad because people are not comfortable dealing with those situations. But when handled correctly, employee issues can often be treated as training opportunities rather than reasons to take disciplinary action. Even something as simple as redecorating workspaces and making break rooms more, places where people want to convene, maybe cleaning those up, that can make a big difference to employee morale as well. Another simple way to improve the workplace is to express gratitude. So how many ways can thank you be expressed, right? There's tons of them. And we don't use most of them because it's so much easier to focus in on the problem than it is to look at everything going right. That's what we're trained to do as humans. But look for what's going right. We know that millennials make up 35% of the workforce, and they're the largest demographic out there in the workforce. 40% of them say they'd put in more effort if they were thanked more often. They have a need to be seen, recognized, and they really want to get into these leadership roles, which they will someday be taking over from Generation X. So workplaces that have a culture of gratitude and recognition see about a 20% increase in profits and about a 30% decrease in turnover. They always say, people don't leave the job, they leave their supervisor. So when they don't feel appreciated or recognized by their supervisor, you're going to see more turnover, you're going to see less productivity, and those costs are very high. So investing in people is an investment in the organization, and it improves the bottom line. And next, you want to ask what matters to employees for benefits received. Which groups are you trying to retain, and which groups are you trying to recruit? And these often can be very different position types and very different demographics that may be looking for very different things. And most of us are not from huge employers that can offer this wonderful full array of benefits, but pick one or two that really makes you stand out from the crowd. Do you really have this fantastic EAP program that just covers a lot of therapy visits? Or do you have wonderful flexible scheduling and paid time off? What is it that matters to the demographic you're trying to attract, and really develop up that benefit, and maybe don't do as much in some of the other areas? And think about, what is actually covered for behavioral health care and substance abuse treatment by the insurance that is offered? What's the continuum of services? If there's an EAP, how many visits are provided? Is the healthcare network adequate to get access to behavioral health services when needed? So you may offer access to mental health services, but have you checked around lately to see how long it really takes to get in with someone? I know in my organization, somebody comes in and they want medication management. We're 3 to 4 months out for getting somebody in the door, and we're probably the fastest in the area. So it's a problem. So you want to catch things early and quickly so you can get people into treatment when they need it instead of having to wait for months and months. And look at organizational level initiatives. So are you providing education on the resources you have available? I mean, most employees probably don't even know what's actually out there offered to them, and that can make a big difference just to make them aware. Providing accessibility to care, dedicated time off, addressing stigma in the organizational culture, helping to normalize mental health, encouraging people to reach out for help, that goes a long way. Accessibility to digital support, especially for millennials, who we know is the biggest group in the workforce. That's important because they're tech savvy and they've been the ones most impacted with mental health issues and with financial issues from the pandemic. And I did send an apps resource list and also just a general resource guide in the Quad City area that everybody should get emailed out after the presentation. You also, the workplace is becoming the new parent to some degree. And these kids coming in as the social media generation who sat around and texted each other and watched these stupid things on Snapchat and Instagram and all this other stuff. And a lot of times they really don't know how to interact with people all that well. And so teaching skills to build resiliency, offering resiliency programs. I like the word resiliency because it doesn't have the same stigma as mental health. Providing them mentoring on how do you talk to someone? What if you have to have a difficult conversation with somebody who's 10 years older than you? How does that look? How does that go? Let's role model some of this. That's going to be important coming up that we maybe didn't have to do for some previous generations. Consider implementing peer support groups, employee well-being programs, and maybe even having some on-site behavioral health resources. You know, maybe a counselor's there for a day, anybody can go in and talk, no questions asked, and it's just promoted as a positive workplace benefit. But the number one way to improve your mood is connecting with another person. So you really want to encourage, foster, and support connections with people within your organizations. And so with that, I'm going to leave you. This is my contact information if you have any questions. And we also have a lot of crisis lines and supports in the Quad City area. So the Eastern Iowa Crisis Line serves 5 counties in the Eastern Iowa region: Scott, Clinton, Jackson, Cedar, and Muscatine. Vera French has an after-hours crisis line and crisis house for short-term stabilization of a crisis situation. And Robert Young Community Mental Health Center offers the same in Illinois as well. And so those are important numbers for you to have on hand if you have someone that maybe needs more immediate help. And I really appreciate you having me here today and inviting me. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We'd be happy to help out and connect with you.
Great. Thank you very much, Denise, for sharing your time and sharing your expertise in this very important topic, and a topic that is impacting organizations, not just in the Quad Cities, but nationally and around the world. So wanted to just keep you up to date on a couple of items. Paylocity, the survey is available in the chat. So if you wanted to submit your information to be entered for your chance to win the raffle, please feel free to do that. The link to the recording will be sent out following the event, along with a certificate of completion that you can use to submit for your if you're SHRM certified for your continuing education credits. And also the additional resources that Denise had mentioned would also be shared at the end of today's event as well. So as a reminder, we invite you to stay up to date with Great River events by visiting our website, reading our monthly letters, and following us on our LinkedIn page, which I will put in the chat here.
Oh, Leanne, you just muted.
Oh, sorry, I don't know what happened there. Not sure what you heard, but visit our LinkedIn page. I'm going to go ahead and share the information in the chat right now. As a reminder, just join us for the next virtual event that we have scheduled for Tuesday, February 15th from 11 to noon. And there we'll be joined by Mary Erlane, and she's the author and founder of Peak Development Strategies. And she'll be talking with us more about the different generations in the workplace. I want to thank you all for your time and attendance.
Hey, Leanne, if we have a
Yes.
couple minutes left, can we just kind of ask for questions out there?
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask Denise before we wrap
'Cause
up?
I know that I do actually. Because I'm just wondering if you are kind of seeing some of these symptoms or some of these signs in an employee and you go ahead and talk to them, is there any way they can come back and sue you or do anything to be like, you can't say that to me? There's no way that you're a doctor and you can diagnose this, or you discuss my mental health with somebody else that I know and that's not okay. Like, are there repercussions to any of this in the workplace as an HR professional?
So I think, it's the way you have the conversation, how you talk to the person. I wouldn't, obviously you wouldn't say, I'm diagnosing you with anxiety. You would say, hey, I'm concerned about you because here's what I'm seeing. And I am wondering if you might benefit from some of the resources that we have available to help you.
Okay.
And I think that supports Denise's point too of having training with managers and supervisors of how to have those difficult conversations. I think that is so important to say, hey, I recognize this behavior. It seems different than maybe what I've seen before, and want to just share with you what options we have available. Great question.
Rhonda, do you have a question?
Yes, hi, I do. So Denise, we've just initiated Talkspace. So we have a really good EAP program. We've got a doctor on demand program. We've got a couple other, but we just initiated Talkspace. Have you heard good reviews in regards to Talkspace, especially like you were talking about with those with the millennials where they can use text versus kind of having that one-on-one?
Yeah,
Can you give any feedback or?
I think the chat lines, the text lines are particularly popular with that younger generation, which, texting is kind of how they have gotten through life to some degree so far. And so I think that's a wonderful resource to provide. And I think, promoting, hey, we have a variety of resources. You can see in person, you can do texting, we have doctor on demand. That's just fantastic. And making sure, periodically putting that out there and letting people know what's available. I think that's very important. I would also say though, too, that person connection, it's a real thing. And so I don't know if you have any idea of who's using some of the chat lines or not, but sometimes reaching out to people and saying, hey, we appreciate you're using this and we would love to see you and talk to you and have you meet with someone in person, because forming those connections is really important in conjunction with some of those social media platforms.
Great. Thank you for your question, Rhonda. Well, we are right at 1 o'clock. So again, just want to be conscious of everyone's time. Again, thank you for taking the time to join us today. I know I have a ton of notes on tips and strategies that Denise had shared to help us really reduce that stigma of mental illness in the workplace, and some items to help us recognize when our employees are experiencing some level of mental illness. So again, appreciate your time. We look forward to seeing you at an upcoming Great River event. And until then, stay healthy and safe. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.